This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Have I Got News for You is back for another season. Roy Wood Jr., Amber Ruffin, and Michael Ian Black are finding the funny in the week's biggest stories. Have I Got News for You, Saturday at 9 on CNN, and stream next day on Max.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be joined by Andrew Buss, who has written a new book about the making of the 2007 hit comedy Superbad. And the name of the book, of course, is I'm McLovin, which is one of the most famous characters of that film. But before we get to that, thank you for coming on the podcast, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
In your book, you describe your sort of first experience with the film, but for our listeners, could you map that out for us?
Absolutely. So my first experience with the film was the day it came out. August 17th, 2007. I was just about to enter high school. I was 14, and because I couldn't get into an R-rated movie, and none of my friends were around to sneak in that night, I wound up going with my dad and my grandfather to the movie. I knew it was a little raunchy. I wasn't quite prepared for how raunchy, but it was one of those really remarkable experiences where it's the three generations kind of bonding together. It was the only time, or one or two times that ever happened with the three of us, my dad, my grandfather. But the other thing that I really felt strongly about was how funny the movie was, but also the energy in the room. It was the best screening I've ever been to for a comedy. There was an electricity in the air, one that I haven't really been able to feel since in seeing a comedy in the theater. There was just something really phenomenal about that experience, and that always stuck with me. And the movie itself, I've revisited so many times over the years, but that first experience is really my favorite movie-going experience I think I've ever had in the theater.
Were you always a fan of comedy in particular? Because this film obviously is a milestone in that sort of American teen comedy genre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up as a huge comedy fan. The movies I remember really strongly growing up was when I was 3 years old. I loved Billy Madison because that was one of the things my parents would have on and I would watch. And I think I was banned from watching it when I was 3 years old once I started walking around saying that Donkey Kong sucks. And then I remember the Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler movies especially were big in my house growing up because that's what, my parents were into watching. I became a fan of kind of movies on my own. One of my favorite movies of all time is Mel Brooks' The Producers. And when I discovered Mel Brooks, that really kind of opened my eyes to what you could do with a joke and just how far you can take it until the audience really has no idea where you can possibly go with it. He was a huge influence on me. And so, yeah, comedy was a big part of my upbringing.
Yeah, it's almost like Mel Brooks is almost like a test to destruction of comedy, in terms of Blazing Saddles. He takes the Western, out of the lot and into the street.
He really is. And what's so interesting is those movies are able to hold up, even though there's obviously things you couldn't get away with Blazing Saddles if you made it today. I just saw it last year with a packed audience out here in LA, and Mel spoke afterwards. He's someone I've interviewed a few times, and he's my comedy hero. But what was interesting is that crowd ate up every bit of that movie. I wasn't sure how it would do in such a big space in 2024 last year, but it did amazing. And it really showed me, oh, this movie does have a timelessness to it, even though there are things that are really edgy and you would never be able to do today. It's still, the comedy still holds up in it.
I'm always interested by that idea of you couldn't do it today, because I always think that you probably could, I mean, it's like Richard Pryor wrote that movie. It's not, there's a sensibility to it which is as relevant today, if not more so, maybe in confronting racism rather than.
I think you couldn't do it today in as much as I don't want to get into a huge discussion on this, but satire obviously doesn't go over as well today as it might have in the years past, because with satire, you need to be convincing kind of in your conviction, in as much as it is really hard. Satire is the opposite of what you might actually believe. So it's hard for it to come across. It's hard to have an audience, to trust an audience patience at this point, especially because everyone's attention span is a lot shorter. There's this great comedian, Tim Minchin, who is a musical comedian that I love. He had this song about 15 years ago or so called I'm going to spell it because if I say it, it might sound different. It was called C-O-N-T, so Kant. And what he performs the entire song, says, I've never done this song before. And he has lyrics in front of him on the piano. And he's like, I've never done this. I have to read the lyrics. He does the entire song, and it's the most offensive, hateful, horrible song you've ever heard, where he's just offending everybody. And then he realizes half of the lyrics were covered up, and the song is actually called Context. He does the song over again, and everything he said that was offensive is justified. And that's joke only comes in 4 minutes in, and I don't know what comedian would be able to trust that the audience wouldn't walk out today. And it really is remarkable. And obviously, it's one of those things that it's probably just, I remember sitting in the crowd 15 years ago, seeing him do that, and I'm like, this man is an absolute genius. Like, it really threw me through a loop and stuck with me.
Superbad is doing exactly the same things in that it's very much pushing the boundaries that existed at the time, and maybe, as you say, certainly would be done differently today, or would be in a different context. But let's talk about the beginning of Superbad, because this was the brainchild of two comedians, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. Am I correct in thinking they're both Canadian?
Yes, they are, from Vancouver.
There's a thesis to be written about Canadians and American comedy, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Jim Carrey,
SCTV, yes.
Exactly, yeah, Schitt's Creek and all those guys.
Kind of the godfather of the biggest comedy institution, Lorne Michaels, is Canadian. So that Saturday Night Live ties back to him. Jim Carrey. And in Superbad, it's not even just Seth and Evan, it's also Michael Cera is Canadian. And Martha McIsaac, who plays Becca in the movie. So it really has a lot of Canadians in that film. And in comedy in general, Martin Short, the list goes on and on, like all the gifts that we've gotten from Canada in terms of comedy.
Yeah, you don't want Trump building that wall too quickly, do you?
No. God, no. That's a whole nother topic right there. No, we need it. We need Canadians. We need the humor. We need desperately right now, especially.
So we get Superbad as this idea that it sort of the way you describe it in the book, it sort of comes from them sort of watching stuff and saying, we could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my favorite quotes I think Evan gave me, which is, we could write a better movie than this. And that really kind of triggered my imagination when he said that, because I realized there is so much art that comes from not just being inspired by something good, but there is art that can come from, if that counts as a movie, I can do this. And the fact that a really bad movie that neither of them can remember set them on this journey that didn't end at Superbad. Their whole lives can be kind of tied back to Superbad, even though Seth was doing Freaks and Geeks and Knocked Up and all that stuff before Superbad ever came out. Superbad really set a precedent for teen comedies that would follow, but also their careers. So Absolutely. Like that journey they went on together, watching a bad movie leading to Superbad, it really is remarkable.
Alan Moore, the graphic novelist, gave the advice to read bad books. Don't just read good books. Read bad books as well, because you
Yes.
can learn from bad books. You can learn from bad movies, you know?
Absolutely. I love bad movies. I really do. I love to laugh at them, but I also love to watch them just to see how it's done wrong because, and I read about in the book, nobody will set out to make a bad movie. And if they do, they would never admit it. Even Tommy Wiseau, who did The Room, which is, highly regarded as the worst movie of all time, even he has denied that he set out to make a bad movie. So, which I don't know how much I believe that. Actually, I do. I do believe because he's so convincing and thinking of himself as this dramatic actor in this ridiculous movie. But I mean, yeah, I just don't think bad movies are intentional.
I think there's something almost metaphysical in The Room that if you would pick up on if they were sort of winking in any way whatsoever, and that's a
Right.
movie devoid of wink.
Absolutely. They might be trying to make a farce, but that's about it.
The idea of doing this teen comedy as well is very autobiographical for Seth and Evan, to the point that the names of the main characters, Jonah Hill is playing Seth and Michael Cera is playing Evan.
Right. I'm sure that got confusing on set.
I kind of like that idea as well, that they just keep their names in as the characters. I mean, it'd be like a 2-minute rewrite to say search and replace, find and replace, and go through the document.
And they wanted to. They
Right.
put them in as placeholders. They put no thought into it. They're like, well, let's just use our names for now. And then over the years, people kind of liked that. And it's not even just their names. Like everybody, like a lot of names in that film are kind of reflective of, people in their orbit. Fogel, who is better known as McLovin, but the character's name actually is Fogel, is based on Sammy Fogel, who was their best friend. So. And by the way, Fogel, what I love about it in Superbad is they never establish if it's a first or a last name. Like we're left to believe it could be either.
One of the things that, and excuse me if I'm jumping forward, and by all means, pull me back at any point, but one of the things that I remember on watching this movie, which really elevates the movie, was the sense that there was a real emotional core to the film. Yeah, it was really, really funny, and it had outrageous characters, and Bill Hader and Seth Rogen as the two cops were a huge highlight, and Christopher Mintz-Plasse was a massive highlight, as obviously you take the name of the book from it. But there was also this core of like male friendship, which you kind of don't see, at least not explicitly.
Absolutely. I mean, it really, and I mean, it's all summed up in that final scene of the movie, but in that, and not the final scene, but like one of the last scenes where they're in the sleeping bags together. But I mean, the whole movie, the surface of it is two guys, trying to get alcohol for a party. So their dream crushes would finally kind of notice them. That's the conceit of the movie. But what's so funny to me is, they didn't even need the alcohol because when they get to the party, Emma Stone's character, Jules, she doesn't drink. And then Martha McIsaac's character, Becca, is already drunk. So that entire journey of trying to get alcohol was completely fruitless. And I kind of like that. That didn't need to be a thing. But the other part of it is, yeah, I mean, the whole movie, they're talking about going away to college and, getting into different schools. And that's kind of... It's set up in the first few minutes, but then it keeps coming up, Seth having, or Evan rooming with Fogel in college. And it just keeps coming up, and then it finally kind of comes to a head. And you realize at that point, oh, this movie is about more than just guys trying to get girls to notice them. And that's really not what the movie is. I think the movie is about these two guys going on a journey together right before they go off to different schools. And it shows like separation anxiety and just admitting that you love your best friend. I mean, there's something so beautiful to it that you're right, we hadn't seen before.
When they start this film, I mean, it's one of those things that you have when you watch a movie for the first time. It sort of appears to have fallen from the skies and is complete. But of course, this film, as many have, took a huge period to develop and to come to fruition. And one of the things that you outline in the book, which I found fascinating as well, was how long it took to cast the film, and what painstaking process that was.
Just the casting part? Yeah. I mean, it took 12 years from them writing it as 13-year-olds to the movie finally coming out. But yeah, as far as casting, that took a long time as well, because they cast Michael Cera first, but then they kept running into obstacles. They couldn't find anyone they wanted for Seth, or no one that would be able to kind of hold up with Michael Cera, no one that could kind of meet him on his level comedically. They just weren't finding anybody. And then the whole time, Jonah Hill kept saying, "What about me? What about me?" But they wrote him off because they felt he was too old, because he was so close in age to Seth, and he was in Knocked Up playing, a 20-something while they were trying to find the character of Seth for Superbad. So they already knew that, what he could do comedically. It wasn't against him or his range. They really liked him, but they just didn't think he could. They wanted it to be younger. They didn't want to turn into Grease, where you have all these old people playing high schoolers and you're kind of pulled out of the movie in that way. Greg Mottola was really adamant about wanting younger people. That's why, Michael Cera is 18, Christopher Mintz-Plasse is 17, Emma Stone is 18, I believe. Or I think she might have even been 17 when they started. But yeah, they're all young people, but finally Jonah was able to convince them to let them do a screen test out of sheer frustration. But that wasn't the most challenging part. The challenge was, of course, McLovin, and they did so many auditions. And to the point I would find in my research, like, there was a reporter on the set of Knocked Up with them. And at one point, the reporter went with them into a room, and this New York Times profile talked about them watching audition after audition. They saw James Franco audition, Dave Franco, who was right about that age that Seth quickly wrote off as being too good looking. And Seth's, I didn't put in a book, but I think Seth's way of conveying that was, "I would fuck him." So that was how Seth wrote him off as not a good fit.
Hold the presses. Are you saying he wouldn't fuck Christopher Mintz-Plasse?
I mean, I don't know. I'd have to ask Seth that one, but who knows? And by the way, Christopher Mintz-Plasse was 17, so he shouldn't have. Let's put it that way.
Not. Okay, yeah, that's way beyond the line. There we are, doing exactly what we said you can't do anymore.
Right, exactly.
So what sort of got it for Christopher?
Well, basically, Alison Jones, the brilliant casting director, who's she won an Emmy for Freaks and Geeks, actually, for casting that show after it was unceremoniously canceled. But she would put up ads at local high schools. They were so desperate. And then finally, Christopher Mintz-Plasse's friend Hunter had found out about it in drama club or acting class. And then he convinced Christopher to audition, and he took, like a headshot on his flip phone at the time, the night before at like midnight, and just went in on a whim. Had never auditioned for anything beyond like a school play, and wound up getting the part after a couple callbacks.
And the thing that seems to have been important for all of the actors, including Emma Stone, was they didn't just have to sort of be the right age or look the part or even be good actors, but it was also the improvisation, which was like a key part of their getting the roles.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's something they knew that Jonah could do, and then they saw that Michael Cera could do it. And Michael Cera was recommended by Jay Baruchel, actually, who was also in Knocked Up and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, I mean, Christopher Mintz-Plasse showed in his callback that he could hold his own against Jonah. Jonah was improvising, and then Christopher just started improvising with him, which really pissed off Jonah. Jonah said he was stepping on his lines, and I think someone said, it might have been Judd Apatow, who said, "The fact that you don't like him and don't want us to cast him makes us want to cast him more." But yeah, I mean, they could all improvise. Emma Stone had never done it professionally, but she was part of an improv theater in Arizona when she was like 14 before she moved out to LA. So yeah, they all had improvising kind of background and experience. So,
And Emma Stone, this is the first time she appears with like red hair as well. That sort of becomes she sort of is angry that then becomes like a signature for her. That's not her natural hair color.
no, that was all Judd. Judd basically went, well, Mark McIsaac's brunette, and you both can't be brunette, and he's just like, what if you have red hair? That became her signature look because Judd Apatow just and he admits, he's like, I knew nothing about hair. He's like, I knew nothing about, beauty or anything. He's like, I just thought, what about red hair? And that has stuck with her, and she is always going to be known as a redhead, even though she's I think she's originally blonde, if I'm not mistaken. I don't even think she's brunette. I think she might have been blonde.
I think so too, but I mean, I'm not entirely sure because when
No,
I think
I know.
of her,
We're just speculating.
yeah, that's what springs to mind. I mean, I think the thing that's great about Lovin' as well is, I mean, you talk about this in the book, how that sort of that character type, that sort of third banana, I think you refer to it as, of the sort of nerdy friend, the Kramer of the group, who
Right.
might, everybody cheers when they're on, but they can't be on too often. It's a really interesting sort of balancing act in terms of how much they're allowed to appear in the film.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of the character of McLovin is kind of like, I guess you could call it a flavor. You don't want too much of the comic relief. It's like kind of in the Anchorman movies with Steve Carell's character Brick. It's the same thing where had that he been in the movie more, he was the, he stole every scene he was in, but if he's in the movie more, you might have grown a little tired of that character. Yeah. Same thing with McLovin. I think they used him perfectly, and he's in the movie a lot. Like, I mean, him and the police officers, those are probably some of my favorite scenes. It just, they gave him a really good kind of B plot to go down with his own, they gave him his own kind of journey to go into. And I mean, that character is still so funny. And he's the one that is so closely identified with this movie. I mean, you can walk into Target today or any kind of retail store like that sells like those $10 graphic tees, and you can see his face. And that fascinates me that, Christopher Mintz-Plasse is, 18 years older than he was when he made the movie, and yet he can walk into any store and still see his face somewhere. Like it's not like just being a movie star and, hey, everyone knows who you are. It's like you can actually see your face on merchandise so many years removed. That's kind of rare.
What makes this film different from, I think in a sense we've already hinted at and talked about it, but let's pursue this anyway. It exists in this legacy of sort of teen sex comedies from Revenge of the Nerds and Porky's. As you mentioned earlier, going to see it with your granddad and your dad, it's a raunchy movie. It's one of those sort of like movies that if you're watching it at home, you might sort of say, don't you have anything else to do, to your parents as you watch it. So what is it, where do you see this as standing in that legacy?
Oh, I definitely think, the movie's legacy is still moving forward. Whenever you see it on streaming, it's always in the top 10. Like, it's one of those movies that people keep discovering. It's got the discovery factor. When I was writing a book, I would go onto TikTok just to see what was out there. And, the kid who played Seth in the movie, 10-year-old Seth, who does the penis drawings, he's going viral on TikTok talking about his scene. Like, there's still a fascination. And like I was saying, it's still in Target. And my sister texted me a picture in Forever 21, which is predominantly for girls her age in like early 20s, like, teenagers, early 20s, whatever. And in the girls department, they have a picture from Superbad. And it's like, so it kind of transcends just your idea of teenage boys, raunchy comedies. And it's become a movie that a lot of people can identify with because, like I said, it's about friendship. It's about so much more than just the raunchy sex. But it is a movie that you might not want to watch with your mother. I'll admit it. My mom had never seen it until I was working on the book. Finally, she sat down and watched it.
This is what you're doing with your days, Andrew.
My parents, I'll say, are very cool about that stuff. My mom doesn't get offended by anything dirty or anything like that. My dad, not only did we see Superbad, I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I saw the movie Zack and Miri in
Oh,
a movie
right,
theater with my
right.
dad. A year later, another Seth Rogen movie, but for people who don't know the full title, I'll say it. It's Zack and Miri Make a Porno. What compelled?
What says this is a Friday
No
night
idea.
movie for me and Pops?
I have no idea. And I love Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith, I've gotten to know very well, working on a couple of things with him over the years. But I mean, I don't know what compelled me. I really don't. But it just shows the legacy of like, get back to the legacy of Superbad. It's one of those things that is so universal. I think it's just something everybody can relate to. When I'm seeing it with my dad and my grandfather in the movie theater, I can laugh at things, and both of them can because it's about high school. It's not about being a teenager in 2007.
There feels like there's something very liberating about that raunchiness, about that, I can't believe they went there
Oh, yeah.
aspect of it, because it's kind of liberating to think, okay, you're having. I was thinking, what's the name of that Charlize Theron film with Seth Rogen, where she's the politician, she's a
A long shot.
long shot? Yeah, I absolutely adored that movie. I thought it was
It's a great
amazing.
movie. It completely undersung.
It's such a good film, and it's so similarly to Superbad. It's got a real heart to it and a real sense of. I don't know. I felt very affectionate towards the characters, which doesn't stop
Absolutely.
them from doing doing some really gross stuff, which is published in the world of the movie. But just the
Right.
fact that you think, well, sympathetic people do stupid, gross things as well and get drunk and do shit, and so
Absolutely.
I feel better
That's
about being me.
It's such a good movie, and I saw that in the theater too. Not with my dad, but I saw I was well in my 20s by the time Long Shot came out, but I was the only one in the theater, and I remembered that was the movie that it was so good, but that started a discussion about R-rated comedies in the theaters because it did not perform as it should have, and that really kind of kicked off that discussion that went on for the last, I think, 6 years now since the movie came out about is that time over?
Mm.
And looking at a time like, looking at Superbad, which was made for $20 million and grossed 170 million in the box office, in no ways is it anything but a monster hit. It really is remarkable how the times had shifted. And by that point, it was only 12 years later. So I mean, you bring up long shots actually an excellent point because it did kick off that kind of discussion. There were a lot of think pieces at that point about how is that generation of R-rated comedies over? And I hope not. I hope the pendulum swings back because I definitely think it's important. It's a very important experience seeing a movie in a theater. I know this is not kind of what you were talking about, but I just had to throw it
No, I
out there.
totally agree with you. I think it is in a sense because it is also that it multiplies and magnifies that feeling of a liberation when you're in a theater with 100 people all laughing at something you would be slightly ashamed to have spoken out loud in another context. And you're saying, oh, you remember that time when, I was caught on camera masturbating. That's not something you generally would say, and yet you're in a theater and everybody's laughing at it because the guy's sympathetic and you like him, and it's not I'm just thinking, I'm sorry, I've just got that scene in my head now, so it's making me laugh. Anyway, let's talk about the making of Superbad, because at this stage the actors have been cast, the movie's underway. How much of a role does improvisation, sorry, they've written a script when they were 13 years
Yeah.
old. How much do they stick to the script? How much are they going off on one?
There's always a looseness with the Apatow produced movies, especially. Even though this was one of the first movies of that nature, of the R-rated kind of comedies that Apatow was doing at that point. I think this was the first movie that he wasn't directing. This was the first movie where he was just kind of executive producer, but they kind of took what they had learned working with him over the years and applied it to here, which is there is room after to take it. Yes, you do, the script, you always do takes with the script, but then you have to do a couple of takes, just leaving a little room. And sometimes there's more takes than others. And with those Apatow movies, there's so much ad-libbing going on with particular lines that they have a thing called the linorama. and on the DVD features. And what that was it was basically 5 different variations of each line. And that really gives you the idea of how much improvising does go on any given set. So yeah, there is a lot of improvising, but the script, which I've read the script before, I think it was before the shooting draft, right before. It was only like 2 months removed, but I mean, there was still a lot of stuff that didn't make the final cut. Like even the names of one of the main characters, Evan's love interest, Becca, her name was Helen in that script. So they still had a little bit of evolution with that stuff to go. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think there was a lot of improvising going on in that film, like any of those Apatow.
It must be really hellishly difficult for the editor to come in and sort of, because you're just getting such the anxiety of choice must be enormous.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories about how much ad-libbing would go on was 40-Year-Old Virgin. I think they got to like their millionth or thousand. I can't remember what. They went through so much film.
Oh, they will have been a million. That would be the...
Yeah, I think it was a million. They went through so many reels of film that Kodak sent over champagne to the film set. You've got to be spending a lot of money with Kodak for them to send over champagne, which was not a problem with Superbad because it was shot digitally.
That happened on Terrence Malick's A New World, and it happened on Oliver Stone's JFK. Those are two.
Really? So it is a thing they do.
It is a thing they do. It's like, like in England, when you got to 100, you used to get a telegram from the Queen. It's sort of it's that kind of idea that well done, thank you. And by the way, the champagne costs much less than what you paid.
Right, exactly. But I do love that anecdote where it's like it really shows kind of perfectionism at work, but I mean, in the case of like an Oliver Stone, it's not like there's a lot of ad-libbing going on the sets. It's more about that perfectionism, where with Apatow, he would just let the camera run and, hey, Seth Rogen, Paul Rudd, do you guys want to just talk for 20 minutes? Go. And then, oh, we're out of a reel of film already? All right, put the next one. Like, that is... It was probably very easy for them to get to a million reels.
I do feel that sometimes you can feel that in the lesser Apatow films. That there are sometimes, or some of the sequels to,
the script's not as strong.
Yeah, or they're relying on it. They're just like, it's okay, we'll just improvise something at the time. And I mean, what was great about this movie is that as well as the main cast, you've got someone like Bill Hader in and Seth Rogen as those two, which in any other movie they would be the straight guys, but they're the straight guys who are as funny, if not more funny than they're not zany, but they're really
they're very close to zany. They're not quite zany, but what's interesting, you're right. I mean, it is a weird tightrope where they're very straight in as much as they're not like winking to the camera or anything. Like you feel a sense of authority from these two guys, but they're also incredibly stupid. Like the scene with the clerk at the the liquor store is evidence of that, when she's trying to explain M&M, like, oh, what, like a real M&M, like with legs. And I mean, that really shows how dumb these two cops are before you really get to know them. So we're introduced to them as being these two bumbling idiots, and we're not really proven wrong throughout the movie that they're not those two guys.
It's a brilliant sort of flavor to add to the general mix.
Absolutely, and very needed. I think. I think it's a very necessary kind of tangent from the A plot, which is Seth and Evan trying to get alcohol, because I feel like that without the cops, that could have worn a little thin. Because how many places can you really go with that? But I mean, they were able to do it. I mean, the movie really balances all of its characters in a great way.
What was the shoot actually like in terms of, you often have this thing of like comedies can be the most depressing things to do because everyone's so focused on making them good, or they can be a barrel of laughs.
Oh, it was a barrel of laughs. It was so relaxed. That's the vibe I get because everyone really liked each other. What would happen is they would call their friends out to just hang out on set and basically would call them up like Danny McBride's in the movie, Martin Starr. That's because they're in the background of the party scenes because they just called them up and said, hey, do you want to come hang out on set? We can't pay you, but do you want to just come chill with us? I mean, Clark Duke is in the movie because he was Michael Cera's best friend. All these guys just appear throughout the film at the party scenes because they were around. And then when they weren't filming, everyone just kept partying. Like, it really was a party, just a cool hang for summer. I talk about it in the book, but I mean, I think it was the environment of those Apatow sets because he used the same people because they were all actually friends. The cast all kind of knew each other, and if they didn't know each other, it was close quarters so they could all bond. But it was like summer camp. Like it was another round of Apatow camp because he would film in the summer. All those movies were made during the summer, so he just kept calling people back each year for another round of camp. And you get that vibe in the movie because Michael and Jonah didn't know each other that well, but when they got the part, they had met once at Henry Winkler's son's birthday party. They were mutual friends with his son. But when Jonah got the part, I think Judd called him and said, you need to spend every waking hour with Michael Cera. You two need to bond. So they would go hang out at Cantor's, they would play video games, and basically we're forced to become friends. And that's exactly what wound up happening. There's a great podcast they did like 7 years ago, I think. And it really shows their chemistry off camera really well to this day.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel that Jonah Hill has become one of those actors in that whenever he turns up, you know, you get he adds a certain quality, even in something like The Wolf of Wall Street, which is sort of ostensibly, it's a big Martin Scorsese movie, and he more than holds his own. You know, he's probably the highlight of that film.
Absolutely, and I felt the same way about Don't Look Up. Like I felt like
true.
He did the same thing. That movie, I mean, the movie had so many heavy hitters, but he's able to hold his own in a scene with Meryl Streep, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Jennifer Lawrence, and he's able to just hold his own against those three like powerhouse actors. And by the way, he's no slouch himself. He's got 2 Oscar nominations. I mean, he's made this point before that I think is really important. He's an actor that has made some comedies versus being a comedian who's an actor. Whereas Seth Rogen was, a stand-up that became an actor. It really is the opposite. And people, I do feel for Jonah a little bit because people would get those two kind of conflated sometimes and they would think, because Jonah Hill's done a bunch of comedies, they think of him as just being a comedian. And I do feel like he's had to deal with that a little bit, trying to prove otherwise that, I'm an actor. So I definitely get that struggle.
There's a famous English actor, Harry Corbett, who was, he was a theatre actor and he was in films and everything. And then he made a TV show called Steptoe and Son, which I'm not sure if you get the opportunity just to have a quick look at it on YouTube or something. It's brilliant. It's a real classic of British TV comedy from the 60s. But he was so immediately associated with the role that he played that I think he, like the 6 months after the TV show, he went on stage as Macbeth and people were just laughing at him, and that was kind of completely destroyed. I mean, he had a long career playing this role,
right?
But it didn't, he was a serious actor, and it ruined his career as a serious actor.
That was a big thing with sitcoms, in American sitcoms as well. The one that jumps to mind immediately is The Brady Bunch, which is the cheesiest, campiest, like just, a very not highbrow series. It's meant to be fun. It's a family show. And the actor Robert Reed on there did not like doing it because he was a serious Shakespearean actor, professionally trained dramatic theater actor who wound up on television because it was easy to make that transition. And then after the Brady Bunch, people he had a hard time kind of branching back out. So that happened with him. Ed O'Neill, same thing. He was a Shakespearean, I think it was Shakespearean as well, actor, and then he did Married with Children, and then people just saw him as a comedian.
Yeah. So then he does that and Modern Family, and
of course, yeah. So he's probably come around to accept it. But yeah, I mean, he was another guy that was
It's hard to feel sorry for any of these guys
because they have so much money. People like your work. Geez, who cares? But I do sympathize because I know I would feel the same way they do if I was in their shoes. Like if I'm doing work that I'm not necessarily proud of, and who knows? I can't speak for Ed O'Neill. I have no idea. I know Robert Reed hated the Brady Bunch. I don't know about Ed O'Neill and Married with Children, but I know that if I was doing something that I didn't necessarily care for, and then that's all that people wanted from me, yeah, I'd probably be a little bitter about it, like we all would be. So I can definitely sympathize from their point of view.
I'm constantly fascinated by people who are not as interested in the thing they're famous for as they are for something else. It's like, I don't know, like the Pink Floyd musicians. They're really quite early on are interested in cars much more than they are music. And yeah.
It happens. It's that thing. And, sometimes they don't even want to take the sitcoms. I know Andy Kaufman, who's on Taxi, and I am Andy Kaufman's historian archivist, so I know a lot about Andy, but I know that
he's one of my favorite comedians, like situationist comedy. It's amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. He didn't want to do Taxi. He was talking to it because, it'll help your road dates. It'll help you sell tickets on the road, which it did. It got him Carnegie Hall. Yeah, it got him Carnegie Hall, but, the double-edged sword of it is it made him famous, but he didn't like doing it, and then he had a hard time breaking out of it. So that's,
Yeah, you get Carnegie Hall and everyone turns up expecting the guy from Taxi.
Right, they expected Latka, and he would do a version of Latka on stage, but he also did Tony Clifton, he also did the wrestling. He was so much more than one note. He really was a multifaceted kind of performer, and people only thought of him as Latka because of Taxi.
Going back to our
yes.
Our main attraction. One of the things that we've already spoken about a little bit, I think, is that evolution of the R-rated comedy and how Superbad is in many ways an apotheosis, but is also the beginning of a wave of R-rated comedies, following its commercial success. Are there comedies that you look at? I mean, it feels like we're in a really different environment as well because of streaming, that this kind of comedy would just... I mean, I loved Bottoms recently.
Oh, that was one of my favorite movies of 2023.
Yeah, same here.
I thought it was exceptional. I thought it was so well done.
Yeah, I watched that. I don't generally have time to rewatch movies, contemporary movies. I'm happy to go back and rewatch old movies. I watched that like 3 times on the run, I think.
It's so good. And I actually... got to see it. You're talking about streaming, but I did get to see it in theaters. It's kind of a thing about being in LA. And I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not even just saying this. It is closest. It's not quite at the Superbad level, seeing it with the crowd, but it was very close. I think because it was an LA screening. It was also $3 AMC day. I saw it over at the Grove right up the street. And it was completely packed, and everybody was on board for just a fun time.
Yeah.
So it's not quite at the Superbad level, but it was very close. It was right within that vicinity.
Amazing soundtrack, Charlie XCX. And but so American comedy is alive and well. And I also like the idea that, looking at it from an international perspective, America's got this pool of sort of talent coming from SNL, coming from the sitcoms and whatnot, and for us from the outside, frequently, I mean, like for us, SNL until YouTube was just not a thing.
Right.
The first time we see these comedians, we see them in movies, and we're not. Will Ferrell, I saw in movies. I'd never seen him in it. Anchorman was probably the first time I saw him.
I'm sure, yeah. Not even Elf?
Oh, no, yeah. Sorry, Elf I would have seen, definitely. But no, I probably, actually, tell a lie, I probably saw Elf sort of afterwards, after Anchorman.
I could see that, especially not in America, because, I mean, in America, he was a big star on TV, but his film career wasn't the moment he left SNL. It kind of simmered for a year. Old School comes out in 2003, the same year as Elf, and then with that and Anchorman, that set him off. Like he was completely red hot at that moment.
Yeah, I remember there being the sort of Farley Brothers stage of comedy as well, where you would get DVDs which would say, unrated sort of version of the comedy, and I was like, I not sure I'm that bothered about. Does it make it funnier if there are sort of some tits in there or something?
I think it was a marketing ploy. I read about it in the book. I think it was a marketing ploy. How can we get people to buy this on DVD after they've seen it in the theaters? Oh, what if there's additional features? Well, not everyone goes for bonus features. What if we make them feel like this is a new version of the movie they've never seen? You need to see this version. And very often is the theatrical version of the movie better than the unrated, because the theatrical version is the version that they really put all their focus on. Unrated was, how do we slip these scenes back into the movie? So it was all an afterthought.
Yeah. How can we slip scenes in that we decided that we didn't actually need?
Right, exactly. There might be an occasional kind of, the MPA made them take a scene out to get an R rating. But that's not that common that would wind up in the unrated version.
Having spoken to many people involved, you did a whole swathe of interviews for the book. And sat down with. There must be a great affection from the movie as well, from the guys who made it. That they must feel
Absolutely.
that they owe a lot to the film as part of their careers, even though Seth Rogen was already establishing himself as an actor and a writer. You spoke to the main people involved in the film. What's their attitude to the film now, looking back after time has passed?
I mean, their response to the movie, everybody loves this movie that worked on this movie. They are so proud of it. I mean, I think the biggest testament is they all came back to do the oral history with me for Vanity Fair a couple of years ago.
Right.
Everybody from Jonah to Emma Stone to just everybody participated. Michael Cera, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Seth Rogen, Bill Hader. There's Judd Apatow. There's a love for the movie they all have. I mean, Greg Mottola was more than happy to do multiple interviews for the book and then also write the foreword. So, I mean, Judd Apatow talked about the film. The president of Sony, Amy Pascal, or the former president, I should say, Sony, Amy Pascal, she was happy to talk about Superbad. Like, everybody loved that movie because it was the environment on set. Like, everybody became so close, and it has a life of its own.
Has there ever been talk or discussion about a sequel?
There has, but it's never going to happen.
No.
Everybody has said as much. Judd wanted them to do it right away, show them in college, that kind of thing. Greg Mottola had said right after the movie came out, the only way that would make sense for him to do it is the only way he would even consider it, and I'm sure now he wouldn't consider it at all, but I think the only way at the time was if you had people going in different pairs. So, Evan and one of the cops going off, and then Jonah going off with someone. So that would have been interesting to him, but Seth has said no way. He's like, whatever we did right on Superbad, people love it, and I wouldn't want to take that away. Seth told me, he's like, I would work with everybody again on a different project, but it should not be Superbad.
That's such a... I totally agree with that. There are so many bad sequels. I mean, I love Anchorman. I hate Anchorman 2. I love Zoolander. I hate Zoolander 2.
Right. It's hard to do it well. We talked about Kevin Smith. I do think the Clerks sequels are very well done very well, but it's very hard to go back, especially years later, like without it seeing like this is fan service. You need to. Is there a real story? Is there a reason you're doing this? Can you tell a story that's completely independent? And I think that's what I mentioned, Kevin. I think that's what he did so well with Clerks 1 and Clerks 2, especially because Clerks 2 tells a completely different story. He burns down the location from Clerks 1 in the first minute of Clerks 2, and then tells the journey of them getting back to home again. That's what Clerks 2 is. And I think there's something so beautiful about telling that version of that story. Whereas, I don't want to call out what sequels are lesser, but, there's so many where it's just like...
I've just done it. You can just blink when I name them.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's so many times where it's like, let's just make the same movie again. 22 Jump Street did it right. It wasn't years later. It was only a couple. They did it right because they called out how stupid sequels are. So they were able to do it. There's many that are funny, but so many that are not as funny as the first one. Even Wayne's World 2. I love Wayne's World and Wayne's World 2, but Wayne's World 2 is always going to be the inferior movie to Wayne's World 1. Like, it just, very few sequels are better than the first ones. And, you know, I mean, there are people that do prefer Terminator 2, people that prefer Back to the Future 2. I mean, there are those people out there, so.
Yeah, but they're all wrong.
I'm sure I can think of one. I mean, people love Godfather Part 2 versus 1. There are those people too. But I don't know what I do like. I prefer Godfather 1, but that's just.
I think it's when it comes to comedy in particular. I think it might be to do with time, you know, and surprise. It might that idea that I'm surprised about Derek Zoolander in Zoolander, and the film is a continuum of revelations about just how stupid this guy is. But when Zoolander 2 turns up. Yeah, it's the guy who's stupid again, who has only one expression, and you know, yeah, and that for me is the comedy seems to thrive on surprise. Either that or endless repetition, in which case you have sitcoms, you know.
Absolutely. Which, yeah. We've already talked a lot about sitcoms. We've really covered so many topics in this hour. I love it. It's been
Superbad plus the history of comedy.
The history of comedy. We talked about Blazing Saddles. We talked about Shakespearean actors going hammy on sitcoms. We've covered it all.
Excellent. Well, listen, Andrew, I've got one last question for you, and I'm going to let you go. Can you recommend a film book for our listeners? Something that might have inspired you, or you might have read at some point in the past that you can shove our way.
Does it just have to be film? Because there is a TV. I'll do a film and a TV one.
Yeah, sure.
I'll do both. Let me start with the TV one while I think about film. And this is in my mind just because Saturday Night Live 50 is coming up. There is a great book that not everyone would be aware of that is called Backstage at Saturday Night. It came out in late 80s. I'm trying to remember the names of the authors. Doug Hill, I think, is one. But anyway, it is such a well-done book and a history of that show. I prefer to any other narrative about that show. That's one of my favorite books on comedy. It got me interested in comedy and Saturday Night Live, reading that book. So that's a good one. Film book, I'm trying to think of a classic one. I am a sucker for a really good oral history book on movies. So I'll recommend one, which is that I used when I started writing books about films, which is a book on Dazed and Confused, The Making of Dazed and Confused. All right. That's a good one.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, that one, that really, you know, I haven't done an oral history book yet, but reading oral history books really get me excited about what you can do.
It's a great format, and it takes a lot of care in putting together those interviews and putting together and to see the narrative through. I think that's fascinating, Andrew. Listen, thanks so much for talking to me. I've really enjoyed reading your book. I've really enjoyed revisiting Superbad.
Thank you. This was so much fun. A really great way to start out the day over here on the West Coast in LA.